The nationalist movement in Indochina. Emerging from the shadow of China. Indochina comprises the modern countries of Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. Vietnam gained formal independence in 1945 before India, but it took another 3 decades of fighting before the Republic of Vietnam was formed. Nationalism in Indochina developed in a colonial context. Its early history shows many different groups of people living in this area under the shadow of the powerful empire of China. Even when an independent country was established, is what is now northern and central Vietnam, its rulers continued to maintain the Chinese system of government as well as Chinese culture. Vietnam was also linked to what has been called the Maritime Silk Route that brought in goods, people and ideas. Other networks of trade connected it to the hinterlands where non-Vietnamese people such as the Khmer Cambodians lived. Here we can see the Indochina map. Here is Laos. Here we can see Vietnam. This is Cambodia. Colonial domination and resistance. The colonization of Vietnam brought the people of the country into conflict with the colonizers in all areas of life. The most visible form of French control was military and economic domination, but the French also built a system that tried to reform the culture of the Vietnamese. Nationalism in Vietnam emerged through the efforts of different sections of society to fight against the French and all they represented. French troops landed in Vietnam in 1858. They had established a firm grip over the northern region. After the Franco-Chinese War, the French assumed control of Tonkin and Annam, and in 1887, French Indochina was formed. In the following decades, the French sought to consolidate their position, and people in Vietnam began reflecting on the nature of loss that Vietnam was suffering. Nationalist resistance developed out of this reflection. Here we can see the image of French troop in China, Indochina, and this here we can see the Franco-Chinese War, the image of Franco-Chinese War. So why the French thought colonies are necessary? For many European powers, colonies were considered essential to supply natural resources and other essential goods. Moreover, the colonizers thought it was the mission of the advanced European nations to civilize the backward people. The French began to build canals to irrigate the land in the Mekong Delta for increasing cultivation. This helped in increasing rice production. Vietnam exported 2/3 of its rice production, and by 1931 had become the third largest exporter of rice in the world. After that, the French began to work on infrastructure projects. This was necessary for transportation of goods for trade and also for moving military garrisons in the entire region. Construction of a Trans-Indo-China rail network began in this period, and the final link with Yunnan in China was completed by 1910. The second line was built to link Vietnam to Siam. The image of Mekong Delta Canal and Trans-Indo-China Railway. Should colonies be developed? Let us find an answer to this question. Paul Bernard was an eminent French thinker. He believed in developing infrastructure in Vietnam so that people could be more prosperous. A prosperous public would mean a better market for the French business. He also advocated for land reforms so that farm output could be improved. The colonial economy in Vietnam was mainly based on rice cultivation and rubber plantation. Rail and port facilities were set up to service this sector. Little effort was made by the French to industrialize the economy. Bernard suggested that there were several barriers to economic growth in Vietnam: high population levels, low agricultural productivity, and extensive indebtedness among the peasants. These were the barriers that Bernard suggested. To reduce rural poverty and increase agricultural productivity, it was necessary to carry out land reforms. A prosperous public reform, as the Japanese had done in the 1980s. The dilemma of colonial education. The French wanted to civilize the Vietnamese by imposing the modern European culture on them. They also wanted to educate the local people so that a large workforce could be created for clerical jobs. They did not want to impart a better education, as they were afraid that more education could lead to awakening among the local people, which could prove dangerous for the colonial rulers. Talking modern. The leaders in Vietnam were highly influenced by the Chinese culture. It was important for the French to counter this influence. They systematically tried to dismantle the traditional education system and establish French schools for the Vietnamese. Some French policy makers wanted the use of French as a medium of instruction. They wanted to build an Asiatic France which could be solidly tied to the European France. Some other policy makers wanted Vietnamese to be taught in lower classes and French in the higher classes. There was a provision to award French citizenship to those who learned French and acquired the French culture. There was a deliberate policy of failing the students in the final year of French classes. This was done to prevent the local from qualifying for the better paid jobs. The Vietnamese were shown as primitive and backward, who were only capable of manual labor. Here we can see the Vietnamese used for manual labor. Looking modern. French forced Vietnamese to imitate Western culture. Short haircut was encouraged, while Vietnamese traditionally kept long hair. Now we see the resistance in schools. Teachers and students did not blindly follow what was written in the curriculum. There could be open opposition as well as silent resistance. When the number of Vietnamese teachers increased in the lower classes, it was no longer possible to control what was being actually taught. The schools proved to be fertile ground for developing the feeling of nationalism among the Vietnamese. By 1920s, students began to form political parties and to publish nationalist journals. The Party of Young Annan political party and Annanese student journal are some examples. The imposition of French education and culture backfired as the Vietnamese intellectuals felt a threat on their own culture. Hygiene, disease, and everyday resistance. The city of Hanoi was built by using modern engineering and architecture. A beautiful city with wide avenues and well laid out sewer system. The irony was that the sewer system, which was being touted as a symbol of hygiene, became the perfect breeding ground for rats and led to the plague epidemic in Hanoi. The rat hunt. To stop the spread of plague, as rat hunt was started in 1902. Vietnamese workers were hired for the task and were paid for each rat being caught. People began to catch rats in thousands. The payment was done when a tail of a rat was shown as a proof that a rat had been killed. Many people began just clipping the tails and collecting the bounty. Many people even began to raise rats to earn more. This incident showed that at some juncture, even when the superior power of a colonial master fails, and even the weak can assume a very strong bargaining position. Now let's see the religion and anti-colonialism. The French sought to reshape social and cultural life of Vietnamese. While religion played an important role in strengthening colonial control, it also provides ways of resistance. Vietnam's religious beliefs were a mixture of Buddhism, Confucianism, meaning ancient philosophy of respect and kindness, and local practices. From the 18th century, many religious movements were hostile to the Western presence. The Scholars' Revolt in 1868 was an early movement against French control and the spread of Christianity. The officials who led the revolt led a general uprising in Tuyen and Ha Tinh provinces. Over 1,000 Catholics were killed. This movement served to inspire the other patriots to rise up against the French, and so they crashed the movement. Huynh Phu-Hoa started the Hao movement in 1939, and it gained great popularity in the fertile Mekong Delta area. Huynh Phu-Hoa performed miracles and helped the poor. He tried to stop all the anti-social activities. The French tried to suppress the movement inspired by Huynh Phu-Hoa. The French authorities then exiled him to Laos and sent many of his followers to concentration camps. The vision of modernization. Vietnamese nationalism was marked by the opposition of colonialism in all spheres of life. One group of intellectuals were in favor of strengthening Vietnamese traditions in order to resist Western domination. The other group felt that Vietnam could imbibe the result from the West even while opposing their domination. A famous Confucian nationalist, Phan formed the Revolutionary Society Tuyen in 1903. In 1905, a Chinese reformer, Liang Qichao, guided Chau in writing his influential book, The History of the Laws of Vietnam. However, Tuyen was one nationalist who differed in opinion with Chau. Tuyen accepted the French revolutionary ideal of liberty but accused the French for not abiding by the ideal. Japan and China became the center for revolutionaries to build their network comprising other Asian revolutionaries. In 1907 and 1908, students visited Japan to get modern education. They wanted help from Japan to overthrow the French in Vietnam and re-establish the deposed Yuan dynasty. In 1911, the Chinese monarchy was overthrown by a popular movement under Sun Yat-sen and a republic was set up. The objective of the revolutionaries was to establish a democratic republic in Vietnam and not a constitutional monarchy. The image of Phan Chau and Tuyen. The communist movement and Vietnamese nationalism. There was a profound impact on Vietnam caused by the Great Depression of the 1930s. The Great Depression was the deepest and long-lasting economic downturn in the history of the Western industrialized world. Poorest provinces like Tuyen and Ha Tinh revolted first against the French. French tried to control these uprisings with severity and bombed demonstrators. Ho Chi Minh brought all the nationalist groups together and formed Vietnamese Communist Party. Later, the party was named as Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Japan occupied Vietnam in 1940 as part of the imperial drive to control Southeast Asia. Now the retaliation became tougher as Vietnam nationalists had to fight against Japan along with the French. The League for the Independence of Vietnam, known as Viet Minh, fought the Japanese and recaptured Hanoi in September 1945. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam was formed with Ho Chi Minh as the chairman, the person who founded the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, Ho Chi Minh. Now we will see the new Republic of Vietnam. The new republic faced a number of trials. The French tried to regain control by using the Emperor Bao Dai as their puppet. Faced with the French offensive, the Viet Minh were forced to retreat to the hills. After 8 years of fighting, the French were defeated in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu. The earlier regime was soon overthrown by a coup led by Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem's government was a repressive government. Anyone who opposed him was called a communist and was jailed and killed. Ngo Dinh Diem. His dictatorial rule came to be opposed by a broad opposition united under the banner of the National Liberation Front. The National Liberation Front fought for the country with the help of the Ho Chi Minh government in the north. The entry of the US into the war. The entry of the United States into the war proved to be fatal for both the Americans as well as the Vietnamese. Both of them faced a terrible loss of life and property. A major role was played by the US media and film. The war grew out of fear among US policy planners that the victory of the Ho Chi Minh government would start a domino effect. Communist governments would be established in other countries in the area. They underestimated the power of nationalism to move people to action, inspire them to sacrifice their home and family. They underestimated the power of a small country to fight the most technologically advanced country in the world. The image of American soldiers in Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trial. Ho Chi Minh Trial, elaborate system of mountain and jungle paths and trials used by North Vietnam to infiltrate troops and supplies into South Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos during the Vietnam War. The trial was very effectively used by the Vietnamese to fight Americans. The trial, an immense network of footpaths and roads, was used to transport men and materials from north to south. The trial consisted of dummy routes that served the only purpose of confusing the Americans but was in places 80 kilometers wide. It is thought that up to 40,000 people were used to keep the route open. The natural environment gave the trial excellent cover as the jungle could provide as much as 3 canopies of tree cover which disguised what was going on at ground level. The American response to this was to use defoliants, the most famous being Agent Orange, to kill off the greenery that gave cover to those using the trial. However, while large areas of jungle were effectively killed off, the task was too great and the Ho Chi Minh trial was used for the duration of the war against the Americans in South Vietnam. The image of South Vietnam. Nation and its heroes. The role of women was specified in the anti-imperialist movement in Vietnam. Now let's see women as rebels. Women in Vietnam traditionally enjoyed greater equality than in China, particularly among the lower classes. But They had only limited freedom to determine their future and played no role in public life. With the growth of nationalist movement, thinkers and writers began to project women as rebels against social norms. Many women took part in the battle apart from maintaining the supply line through Ho Chi Minh trial. Apart from being fighters, women also shared the responsibility of rebuilding the economy during peacetime. Women as warriors. In the 1960s, photographs in magazines showed women as brave fighters. They were portrayed as young, brave, and dedicated women. One such woman was Ngo Tuyen. Her heroism relates to her key role in April 1965 in the supplying of Vietnamese defense of Dragon's Jaw Bridge, a key point of the Highway 1 North to South artery in Vietnam. Rebuilt and dedicated in 1964, American air attacks the next year failed to destroy it. It was not until 1972 that American bombing efforts accomplished that goal. Ngo Tuyen held down some of the attacking American planes on April 3-4, 1965. Until the present day, she has been honored with badges and frequent celebrations of her heroism. Many women responded to the resistance movement and helped in nursing the wounded, constructing underground rooms and tunnels, and fighting the enemy. Here we can see Tuyen, the image of a heroic lady. Let's quickly have a view of the chapter, the nationalist movement in Indochina, and what all we studied so far. Indochina comprises the modern countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The French troops in Indochina. After the Franco-Chinese War, the French assumed control of the Tonkin and Annam, and in 1887, French Indochina was formed. Paul Bernard, he was an eminent French thinker who believed in developing infrastructure in Vietnam so that people could become more prosperous. This is the image of Ngo Tuyen, a brave women warrior. In the 1960s, photographs in magazines showed women with rifles and hammer in hand, and they were very brave. This is Ho Chi Minh, is the founder of the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Ngo Dinh, anyone who opposed him, they were called communists. They were jailed and killed. He followed dictatorship, and these were the nationalists of Vietnam, Phan Qichao and Phan Chu Trinh. I hope the topic is clear.